Welcome to Spotlight On, the must-listen podcast series where visionary leaders, global executives, trailblazing entrepreneurs, and top-tier experts come together to share their inspiring stories and tackle the hottest issues facing businesses today. Brought to you by the Barton Partnership, an award-winning global talent solution organisation, we specialise in executive search, independent consulting, and consulting solutions from strategy through to execution. Our mission? To help businesses accelerate their growth by connecting them with world-class strategy and transformation talent. Tune in and join us as we shine a spotlight on the game changers and thought leaders who are shaping the future of business.
Welcome to Spotlight On, Women in Leadership podcast series. My name is Olivia Stainton, Retail and Consumer Lead at the Barton Partnership. Today, I am joined by Waynn Wu. Waynn was appointed Chief Strategy Officer at Philip Morris International, having joined the company as Vice President, Mergers and Acquisition, and President of PM Equity Partners in 2022. She is a purpose-driven business leader and is highly experienced at delivering structural and complex M&A transactions that truly create sustainable growth for multinational organizations. Waynn has an impressive track record of fostering and managing business growth across the US, Europe, and Asia, leveraging data science, driving global innovation, transforming organizations, and building highly engaged teams. Before joining PMI, Waynn was Managing Director and Partner at Credor, a private equity firm. Prior to that, she served as Chief Operating Officer and a Chief Financial Officer for Zwellig Pharma in Taiwan, and held several senior positions at Danone in Amsterdam and Singapore. She started her career with McKinsey & Company in San Francisco. Waynn also holds an MBA from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School and a bachelor's degree in economics from Stanford University. Welcome, Waynn. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. Thank you so much for joining. I'm excited to dive into this conversation. Why don't we start by take it back to the beginning? You've spoken about growing up in quite a traditional Asian household. How did those early cultural expectations shape your ambition and leadership style today?
Sure. So incidentally, I grew up in a family of three girls, and I'm the middle child. So there's a term called middle child syndrome. So you're not the oldest, and at the same time, you're not the youngest. You kind of have to find your own space the whole time, and your own voice for that matter. And I do have a tiger mom, which I'm very proud of, that have absolutely honed my moral values and more importantly, about being extremely frugal and diligent. As a result, having a tiger mom and a family of three girls, very quickly you realize the fact that you need to conform in a lot of circumstances. And this is the instance where I actually realize I'm actually not very good at conforming. I'm constantly thinking about, in order to find that space, in order to find that voice, what is it that I can do differently?
You mentioned as well, Stanford marking a turning point in your path. Would you mind explaining how the shift from change everything to lead the change has influenced your approach to leadership and transformation?
Yes. So growing up, I've been obsessed with changing things. And I've always been a problem solver, meaning I've always tried to look at the problem, the pain points, and figure out how to really go about solving them. And throughout this whole entire process, I have to be the change, meaning if it doesn't start from myself and or it doesn't start from me believing the fact that that is the force to change, it will absolutely not be able to bring others along. And I also like to actually get into industries and or subsectors where you can scale. And last but not least, I think I've always enjoyed working with a group of people that generally enjoys living in a tribe, in a sense. You will need people who are problem solvers, pace setters, and disruptors. And that's why I think I've always been gravitating towards be it industries and scenarios where it involves problem solving, scaling, and last but not least, testing and learning. And you have to also gravitate towards people who allow you to make mistakes, encourage and empower you to make those mistakes, and ultimately learn. Throughout this entire process, this is where if you actually get to learn from your mistakes, the next time you're going to do a bigger swing. And if you were to do that, I think that navigating within a bigger organization is part of the learning curve. It's not something that you can train for, but I absolutely think that is something that you can experience.
And speaking of something you haven't trained for, I'd love you to explain a moment where a younger associate, they told you they didn't want to aspire to follow the same path as you. I'd like to understand a little bit more about that experience. but also how that conversation reshaped your definition of success.
Sure. So I started off describing the fact that, growing up in an Asian household, there is a very clear, typical notion of what success look like. You tend to be very good at school. You excel in pretty much everything that you do. You don't make much of a mistake, and you're very diligent. So you have that picture perfect around what that ideal success look like. So as I get into private equity, I became one of the youngest ever made female partner. And by the way, there's only 1% of female made partners in private equity. So I worked my ass off in order to get to that position and that role. I thought at that point of time, all the female associates and everybody else as a female analyst is going to look up to me and think the fact that, wow, that's so inspiring. If Waynn can do that, so can I. And I thought that will be notion of inspiration. Having said that, I got it entirely wrong because one of my, rising star female associate who I think that, is so talented actually came to me and said the fact that the last thing I want to be is be you because you don't have a life. And when that kind of got to me saying the fact that, yeah, I don't have a life, I think that was like one of the harshest things that I've ever heard for anyone. But as I reflect that, I think there's some truth into it. I have gone through the process of knowing who I am and then becoming who I am, but I have not really internalized loving myself. So I think the notion around know yourself, be yourself, and love yourself, especially the last part, really respecting the fact that you have got you and love yourself. This is definitely something that I wouldn't say that I'm totally adept in it at this point, but this is definitely something that I've learned in that experience and I've gotten better at it.
It must have been such a gut punch moment having somebody say that to you. But, a real opportunity for reflection and the conversations that we've had, and you can really see how you've applied yourself. I'd love to come back to the know, be, love yourself model, but I wanted to ask how that moment impacted what balance looks like for you now. And then also, how do you protect it in high pressure environments?
A couple of things, right? In high pressure environment, in order to making sure that that balance is always something that you look for, a couple of things, maybe just for reflection here. First, I've learned to take the job very seriously, but I don't take myself very seriously. So what that really meant is, after all, the job and the title, it doesn't really define you. You define who you are. So I think understanding that and really internalizing that is actually one of the best way in order to balance that. The other thing is around the fact that I've learned as well to stay in the moment. So I used to be very much around very goal oriented. When I have achieved something, I want on to move on to the next one, and the next one. I've learned to really enjoy the journey, meaning be able to appreciate and smell the flowers along the journey. After all, the destination is actually the start of the next journey. So, and I think that really has allowed me to actually enjoy being in the moment as opposed to, just jumping from one thing to another. And by the way, I'm still very goal oriented. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm not. While you're in it, enjoy the moment. And the last thing I think, which I think is the very important thing as well, bring people along. Throughout the entire career, I have instances where it was so much more rewarding when I have more people that I can bring along or are being brought along by somebody else. When you get to that destination, guess what? The rewards are a lot sweeter.
Absolutely. And, speaking on that last point as well, how would you say leadership teams can better support people that are going through different life phases and just the general evolving needs of people within their teams as well?
Sure. So at this point, I think it might be useful to bring out the notion around gender, because I think something that I've observed women do better at is when women actually learn how to work in collective and help one another in a very collective manner. At the same time, male allyship, I cannot emphasize enough in terms of the number of male mentors or allies that I've had over the years who actually helped me grow and help the entire team grow. Having to identify the specific male allies who actually, regardless of gender, men and women, are interested to help one another to become the better version of yourself. I think these are the kind of people that you need to look out for. Women in collective as well as male allyship. And in conjunction of this community, I think this is where magic can happen.
Absolutely. I think male allyship is extremely important. I have a number of people that I look up to in the Barton Partnership that from a female leadership perspective, but from a male allyship as well. I wanted to touch on the topic of collective power and leadership support, which probably then ties into this last point. But you have emphasized previously the importance of leaders working collectively and intentionally. What does that look like in practice?
The way to define it, if I have a pictorial moment around it, is the fact that if every individual, once you have the opportunity to get through a certain opportunity or a certain door, we should imagine everybody to want to hold the door as wide as possible, as long as possible, so that a lot more people can actually get through the door. That's the pictorial of what that meant. And to do it collectively, it just means the fact that rather than a door, then it becomes a tunnel, and then it becomes much more of an even bigger opening. And I think from that notion that I just described, it requires people to actually come together, wanting to help one another to start. And it just basically starts from people caring for each other and wanting to making sure that we all grow together. I personally realized the fact that when you start to grow as a team, this is where you solidify a lot of ties. And over time, as people start to, have a very different career progression, that's where you start to also learn very different things about one another, because every individual is dynamic, I think, in that manner. I've got people where I've worked with, 20, 25 years ago. Over time, rather than saying in the moment that this person is a good teammate, I would love that person to say 25 years down the road, meet me around the corner of a street and say that, hey, Waynn is a good person. So fundamentally, we all have to start from genuinely caring for the others. And then that's where, the trust will then start to unfold. And I think that's how commonly people known as building relationships. It is something that I think women in general, when asked to build relationships and networks, tend to struggle a little bit. And I think predominantly, it is not just so much about just building relationship. It's really more about building authentic relationship. And building authentic relationship is not a number of relationship. It comes down to a very carefully selected group of people that you genuinely want to spend more time with. And it is not for that project. It is definitely not for that task, but it's somebody that will follow you as well as you will follow the person throughout the career.
It's probably a really good time to return to the know, be, love yourself model. I'm really excited for you to explain this in a little bit more detail, but also perhaps tie into the 5 principles that you co-authored. Could you walk us through the kind of thinking behind that and how you apply it in professional settings?
The be yourself, know yourself, be yourself, and love yourself. There's a very powerful exercise that maybe I can try to introduce, and then it will give a more perspective in terms of how to go about doing it. So the exercise is about the fact that imagine you're 80. So although you're very young, but just try to go with me on this note. That imagine you're 80. Then ask yourself these 2 questions. The first one is, what is the one thing, just the one thing that you will be very grateful for? And the second question is asking yourself, what is the one thing that you are most fearful about? If you look at when you're 80 and look at your younger self and have a very clear backward perspective around what is it that you really want and very grateful for, plus what is it that you will regret or going to be very fearful about, it does give you a very good perspective around fundamentally who you are as a person, who you want to become. And when you are in the journey of doing that, you will learn to really appreciate yourself a lot better for the good and for the bad, because it not necessarily mean that it's always good things. And I think this exercise is extremely powerful when you do that. So that's something you can do for yourself, point 1. And point 2 is allow people who are very close to you, your friends and family, to give you direct feedback. Very often when you work on a few things that you think are you, maybe they are not. Your friends and family, especially your close ones, will tell you the fact that, no, I don't think this is you. You could probably try another attribute and stuff like that. getting that direct feedback is extremely critical. And last but not least, feedback is breakfast to champion. At the end of the day, you need to act on it. So acting on it is probably the toughest part, because acting on it will require you to do quite a bit of experimentation. Experimentation will mean, like, for example, if you pick something like being compassionate to work on, experimenting it will require you to take some risk, because if it's not really you, then you will make mistakes, people will misunderstand you, and or people will perceive you differently. But that's okay, because at the end of the day, that experimentation is really honing and really letting yourself understand, is that really you, or is that part of becoming you? And it's an iterative process. I don't want it to make it sound like buckets, because they are not. It's more like a flow concept. And the more you do the iterative process, you get much better at it, and the cycles get shorter. And that's where you know yourself a lot better, and you kind of can predict, what is it that you will like or you wouldn't like a lot less or more. And that's where you start to love the process a lot more than when you first started.
A quote actually from another video that you've said that really struck with me: if you don't know who you are now, how do you know who you will want to be in the future? One of the other conversations we've had as well is how you've worked on being more empathetic and compassionate in both your personal and professional career. What did that journey look like for you?
I picked up being compassionate very early in my career. It is still something that I need to be very cautiously practicing every single day. I think during the process of understanding why did I go about picking up compassionate to work upon, you almost need to reflect a little bit with the exercise that I just mentioned. When I'm 80, I look back, I really want to be a very respectful and very compassionate person. And it then goes back to when I grew up. I have friends and family, when they are extremely compassionate, that's where I'm very, very close to them. I pick up traits around people that I like, whether I have it or not. It's what I like and what I respect. I test it on myself a little bit. Then I start to realize that, hey, it's not as intuitive, which means I like it, but I need to work on it. So then that is where you know that, hey, you're growing. So the process took me, I think, a little bit more than 3 years until I was really comfortable with the idea that, this is really something that when I get to 80, I want to be very proud. This is something that is part of the becoming me. And I love that about myself. And guess what? Even until today, every single day, I need to remind myself that this is still something that I need to demonstrate, either through a meeting that I have and or conversations that I have. It's something that I have to do in a very mindful manner.
How do you then create space for sincere and empathetic feedback in environments that quite often reward performance over vulnerability?
Yes, I alluded to this a little bit earlier. We have to empower people to make mistakes, empower people to have their voice, because the outcome is not always guaranteed, in a sense that when you empower people to let them have their voice, try new things, experiments, the truth is you try fast, you probably fail fast. Each time you do that, people are going to observe the outcome. If I were to fail and or I would not to be experiment properly, if it's very much growth orientated and learning orientated, I bet you my last dollar, the next time the person do the swing, they will just swing it harder. It happens to myself as well, right? So I have been lucky enough to be in organizations where we disrupt ourselves. Take Philip Morris International, for example. Every day, me and my team, we come to work. We're trying our very best to get ourselves out of our own core business as quickly as possible. Today, 42% of our top line is already smoke-free. By 2030, we want that to be 67% on a very big base. So in order to do that, not everything we do, not every venture that we do, not every partnership and or be it mergers, and not everything is going to be picture perfect. But I think at the end of the day is how quickly we pivot and how quickly we learn from the last pivot. It starts to sound a little bit agentic AI by now, but it is very much around that machine learning that goes with it, but in a very human way, understanding how to pivot, how quickly to do that, and ultimately until it's a seamless process. And I think that is probably where it gets very, very interesting. And that's where everybody all get to benefit in the value creation.
You are leading and shaping one of the most radical transformations across the industry. What would you say has been the most memorable piece of advice that you've received that's really shaped your leadership and has helped you apply this transformation across Philip Morris International?
I think the most valuable one I have is to trust that you have got you. I think, and as I started my career, I'm always looking out for opportunity to prove myself and or opportunities to get better. It's always about, perhaps I'm not just good enough and or who else is better. And that mindset is like half glass empty or half glass full. And I think the best advice is about the fact that trust the fact that you have got you, meaning at the end of the day, you have done so much work on yourself, not just the task or the work and or the team itself. They have done so much work on yourself. You have to trust it. And it is probably the best advice that I've ever had. And as I get to really hone that advice, I also realize that next time when I'm going to trust myself that I've got myself, it's actually very rewarding to actually look at your kind of your older self and think the fact that actually, I do believe that I'm slightly better.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look what I've done type situation. I think that's great. So a great piece of advice that was imparted onto you, you got you. How do you then support and sponsor upcoming leaders within your teams and across the industry?
When I mentioned around the fact that the model around know yourself, be yourself, and love yourself, I start to very much appreciate an individual as an individual, meaning I really think that it's important for every leader to take the time and really understand every other team member as they are. Because Howard Gardner's 8 intelligences, right? Everybody's intelligence in different shape and form is very different. But there's definitely value and uniqueness in every individual. It does take the time actually to uncover what that really meant. And I think that's why understanding that individual and what the motivations behind the individual is actually critical. Then the next step, I think, or the next forthcoming notion is really having this kind of conversations that we're having around what does the person really think about what the person is going to become. And it's very interesting, right? So every time when I have a discussion like that, I always ask them 3 things, just 3 things. And you can try this exercise yourself, Olivia, as well. So I will ask, how did you learn? How do you lead? And how do you contribute? Most people can answer the question, how do you contribute? Instantaneous, right? Because it's about tasks, about how I do my things, what have I done and what I've accomplished. How do you lead? It gets slightly difficult because how do you lead? You will need to reflect into what others think about you, others' feedback about you, and more importantly, how do you react actually with a bigger team as the team start to grow? The toughest thing to answer in that tripod is how did you learn? It is extremely difficult to break down in steps in a very conscious manner. How do you learn? Because a lot of people actually learn by doing. But the downside of learning by doing is unless you know exactly what you're doing, you actually don't really learn by doing. So I strongly encourage everybody to also have a very mindful process around how you learn. Because in the grand scheme of AI and Gen AI today, you also realize the fact that ChatGPT-5 and a lot of the AI applications out there are already having very strengthened, enhanced critical thinking skills. One thing that I personally think is super underrated is math, mathematical skills. So I like math. As a kid, I enjoy math. And I think in math, there are 2 things around math, right? One is problem solving. The other one is comprehension. The reason why I mentioned about this is because it is very important to understand if you're somebody that learns through math, for example, you're actually learning problem solving skills and you're actually learning comprehension. And if you actually can break down into specifically how you learn, you can almost engineer it and making sure that you accelerate your learning path. Because I truly, truly believe that, yes, we all learned as we start our career by doing, but those people who actually enjoy a very accelerated learning / career path tend to be the ones that know exactly how they learned, and then they take that experience to perfect them for leadership as well as for growth. But how you learned, I think is so underrated when it comes to knowing yourself.
If you could go back to the start of your career, is there anything else that you would tell your younger self, advise on?
I touch upon it quite a bit today, but I do want to come back to, at the end of the day, the job and the career and all the title, it really do not define you. It's a common mistake to just think the fact that if I get seniority, then a bigger job title, it just means the fact that I am better than the version I was yesterday and I'm given more responsibility. I think in the grand scheme of the AI future, the way we progress ourselves is no longer by seniority. It will be very skill set based. And one would even argue a very high percentage of the skill sets today may be made irrelevant in 5 to 10 years. So understanding what kind of skill sets is going to be relevant in 5 to 10 years and making sure that it's skill set based rather than seniority based, mastery in nature, I think it's not going to cut it anymore. So going back to your question, I think it's extremely critical to actually understand what that skill set really meant and start practicing it. The fact that I gave around math is a very good example because people think math is just like, calculator can do math, right? So why are we spending so? Excel can do good math. No, math is about problem solving as well as comprehension. And that is very critical skills if you want to do a good prompt. So, and that's why I'm a little bit conscious about the fact that if people now do not do math, how do they actually prompt a good prompt and do a good machine learning without math?
My next question I really just want to ask is about what kind of legacy is it that you hope to leave, not just within the business, but also in how people feel after working with you?
Yeah, high integrity. I think maybe for the nature of the job that I do, being very high in integrity, I think is very important. I come from a very humble family. So values are important, moral values are important. So someone who actually I always look up to are always people who actually have a very consistent kind of demeanor as an individual, career path. And I think that being very high in integrity, I think is very, very important. Respectful. At the end of the day, there's something about me which I think I've started to be when I was very young is I don't really see color and ranks. Basically, the way, Oliver, I talk to you is exactly the same way I will talk to my CEO and or my board of director. The thing is, if I start to see ranks, this is where I believe that you or color, this is where you start to give power away because you need to start to have a very respectful way that you interact with anyone, whosoever, because that I think will also help in terms of how you uphold some of the way you handle yourself in high stress situation, because these are the things that you actually have to hold back to, which is you as an individual being very respectful. And I have to come back to this, being very compassionate. I think this is super underrated, but I think this is also something that when practiced is extremely rewarding.
And there's definitely 3 traits that I can feel when having conversations with you. So I think you're achieving that. For the final question, what is something about yourself or a moment within your career that you're really proud about that maybe not everybody knows or sees on the surface?
Maybe I'll just choose something that is very recent. We had about 2 years ago, we had transaction of a 16 billion transaction of acquisition of Swedish Match. The complexity of this transaction is huge. And it took a year, a lot of endless late nights, not just myself, and a very big team. I'm extremely proud of the team, proud of the way we create value. And in less than, I'll say, 3 to 4 years, we created as a management team together with the entire ecosystem, we created more than 120 billion incremental market cap. It took a lot of hard work from a lot of people. So I just wanted to pay a bit of tribute to it because on the surface, it might seem, a great success, which it is, but a lot of hard work has gone into it. So I want to pay a bit of a tribute to that.
Absolutely. It was an iconic transaction. So you should be very proud to have led the effort there. Waynn, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. Really, really insightful, actionable things that people can go away and think upon. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I can always speak with you any other day. The time just passed like this. And then let's have another coffee chat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.